This lesson is all about writing the equation of a perpendicular bisector. So number one, I've already completed it, constructing a perpendicular bisector. I graphed those two endpoints. I connected them to form a segment. It's here in black. And the blue arcs, if you remember, you open the compass from one end of the segment to the other, draw an arc, flip it around, draw another arc. And this red line is the perpendicular bisector. There's two parts to it. First of all, if it's perpendicular, that means that we have right angles, actually 4 right angles. Also, if it's a bisector, it's splitting the segment in half. So I can mark that in, that those two halves are congruent to each other. Now we're going to do this not using a compass, but we're going to do it algebraically. And all the steps are right here on the right-hand side of your worksheet. So I'm going to go through number one and show you how to do it. Write the equation of the line in both forms. That's because if you look at step 5 here, it says that you can write your answer in slope-intercept form or point-slope form. I want you writing them in both because you don't know how they're going to ask it on the exam, and it's good to practice both. So write the equation of the line that is the perpendicular bisector of the line segment having endpoints, and let's graph those points. And by the magic of movies here, I guess you could say, there is my segment. Okay, so it's the same segment as up above, so when we graph out, when we get our final equation, it should be the red line that we looked at in the first question. Okay, first thing you want to do is to find the midpoint of that segment, because where the midpoint is, that's where the perpendicular bisector is going to cut it in half. So yes, you can do this on the graph, although I'm doing everything algebraically, that means without using a graph. So if you remember, the midpoint formula is x plus x over 2, comma, y plus y over 2. So let's plug all that in. Okay, so we're going to have, if you want to label, maybe because it's the first question, if you look back at it, it might help you out. Maybe just label that we're finding the midpoint here. All right, so x plus x, negative 5 plus 7 divided by 2, all of it over 2. And then remember, go back to the original point, so it's negative 3 for the y plus the other y, which is 5, all over 2. Okay, I'm going to add the top, so negative 5 plus 7 is positive 2. Add the top in the other one, negative 3 plus 5 is also 2. Divide, 2 divided by 2 is 1. So that means the midpoint is 1, 1, which you can check on the graph. Now, usually in the exam you won't have a graph here. You can flip to the back of the exam booklet, but you can see that this is the midpoint. You can actually calculate the midpoint just using the graph. All right, next step. Next step, what we have to do is work with the slope, because we know that the line is going to be bisected that point, but because it's a perpendicular bisector, we need to get the perpendicular slope, which is the negative reciprocal. So the slope formula is y minus y over x minus x. I'm going to go across here. Okay, so it doesn't matter which y you start with. I'm going to start with the first point. So it's negative 3 minus the other y, which is 5. X minus x, go back to the first point, negative 5. Minus the other x, which is 7. Subtract on the top, negative 3 minus 5 is negative 8. Negative 5 minus 7 is negative 12. Always reduce this down. If you have a calculator, you can hit math fraction. But negative divided by negative is a positive, and the largest number that divides into both is 4. So 4 goes into 8 twice, and 4 divides into 12 3 times. Now, this is your slope, but we are trying to find the perpendicular bisector. This is the symbol for perpendicular. So the perpendicular slope is the negative reciprocal, which, if you flip it and negate it, would be negative 3 halves. So this is the slope we're going to be using for the rest of the problem. So the main things we have here are, we know the midpoint's 1, 1. And we know that the perpendicular slope is negative 3 halves. Ooh, that looks like I kind of covered that up there. Okay, now we have to actually get the equation. Now, this should seem familiar from a few lessons ago. I'm going to take it and write it out in point slope form, which is actually right here at step 5, right? So I'm going to go y minus y1 equals, you don't have to write this if you kind of have it memorized, you can just plug stuff in right away, m parentheses x minus x1. And we're going to use the two pieces of information I boxed up here. So y stays y, you're subtracting y1, x1, y1 comes from the point. Your line is going to go through that point. That's why that's the point we're using. So it's 1. Equals m is the perpendicular slope. We don't want the slope of this line, we want the slope of the line that's going to be the perpendicular bisector, so we have to use the negative 3 halves for our slope. Parentheses x minus x1, go back to your midpoint, it's also 1. Now, because it said write the equation of the line in both forms, like this is your answer in point slope form. So if the question just said write the equation of the line and didn't say what form to use, there's your answer. You could just leave it like this right here. But since we have to do the other form, that means we're going to have to actually solve for y and get it in y equals mx plus b form. So if you remember, we just kind of keep going here. So I'm going to distribute the negative 3 halves. So negative 3 over 2 times x. Then a negative times negative is positive. And you can, this is going to give you a decimal. You can write as a decimal or a fraction, it doesn't matter. But negative 3 halves times a negative 1 is going to be either a positive 3 halves or 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. So some of you might like to use the decimal better. Solving for y, I would add 1 to both sides. So we would get y equals negative 3 over 2x. And then adding 1.5 to 1, we get 2.5. So we kind of have two answers here just because of how I wrote the directions. So one of your answers is right here. That's the point slope form. And then the other answer is in slope intercept form because we can see the y-intercept is 2.5. So either one is okay if it doesn't say, like the exam, oh, I thought I could move the whole thing. That didn't work out too well, did it? The exam won't say how to write it, but multiple choice, you would have to know both. So if you're going to write it out, let me pause for a second. Okay, so to actually write out your answer, I'm just going to copy over both forms. I just don't have much room here, but I'm copying this line right here. So here's our answer. Point slope form is easier because you just plug it in, you're done. So like on the exam, that would be the easier one to do. But down on the bottom here, that's your slope intercept form. So we have the slope. You can see the slope. It's negative 3 halves. And then the intercept is the 2.5. So again, one more time, either one is correct. If it doesn't say how to leave your answer. But we can just check this real quick with the line that I have from up above. Now, the slope point slope form isn't going to really help you out if you're looking at graph. Look at the slope intercept form. See how we have a slope of negative 3 halves and a y-intercept of 2.5? Look at this. A slope of negative 3 halves and a y-intercept of 2.5. So you can see how it's going through. I think this moved slightly when I moved the whole, I moved all of the ink, but the y-intercept's 2.5, and then the slope it's going down, it was, what was it again? Negative 3 halves. So it's going to be down 3 over 2, down 3 over 2. So there you go. That's how you write the equation of the line of the perpendicular bisector.